How many people, is it your first Purim? All right, great to have you here. Let's have a seat. And what we're going to do now is we're going to play a short 4-minute video to summarize Purim. Go ahead.
The Purim holiday takes us back to a time in history when genocide against the Jews was attempted some 2,400 years ago. It marks the Jewish people's rescue from the plot of Haman, a high officer of the Persian Empire and advisor to King Ahasuerus. Haman's rage was incited by a single Jew, Mordecai, who refused to bow before him. Rather than seeking revenge against Mordecai alone, Haman plotted against the entire Jewish people. Haman gained permission from the king, Ahasuerus, to do as he pleased against the Jews. He legislated a pogrom that would wipe out every Jew in the empire on a single blood-soaked day. Haman cast lots to determine the day when he and his minions would destroy the Jews. In leaving this date entirely to chance, Haman's message was unmistakable. The Jews who believed in the providence of a beneficent God would be subject to the blind whim of fate. A casual roll of the dice would be the instrument that seals their end, while the God of the Jews would stand helplessly by. Haman's challenge came at a crucial point in history. His provocations were a test. Was God still relevant in the post-biblical age when open miracles were no longer common and prophecy was coming to an end? In the end, the Jews were saved from Haman's plot, but pointedly, they were saved in a non-miraculous way. In the events of Purim, serendipitous happenings conspired to bring about unexpected results. Alone, each of these events could be seen as nothing more than a fortuitous coincidence. But taken together, they weave a miraculous chain of events orchestrated by God. King Ahasuerus held a spectacular 6-month feast in the capital city of Shushan. It just so happens that when Queen Vashti refuses to obey the king, he has her eliminated. And when a global beauty contest is held to replace her, it just so happens that Esther, a Jewish girl, is chosen. When palace guards plot to assassinate the king, Mordecai, Esther's relative, happens to overhear and foil the plot. One night, it just so happens that the king can't fall asleep. He asks for the book of records, which just so happens to open to the page recording Mordecai's long-forgotten act of loyalty. At that moment, Haman happens to approach the king for permission to hang Mordecai. Instead, Ahasuerus tells Haman to dress Mordecai in the royal robes and parade him on horseback through the streets of Shushan. The heroics of Mordecai and Esther was in recognizing God's hand and taking the necessary action, no matter how challenging it may be. When Esther fears approaching the king uninvited because one could be killed for such presumptuousness, Mordecai tells her it is certain that the Jewish people will be saved one way or another. God promised it will never be destroyed. The only question, Esther, is if you will rise to the challenge God has given you, enabling redemption to come through your hand. This is your big moment, the reason for which you were born. At the climactic moment, Esther hosts a banquet where she reveals that she is Jewish and exposes Haman for planning genocide against her people. The king is shocked and orders that Haman be hanged on the very same gallows he prepared for Mordecai. Ahasuerus grants the Jews the right to defend themselves on the 13th of the month of Adar, the day of the planned attack. The Jews defeat their enemies, including Haman's 10 sons, who, like their father before them, are hanged on the gallows. Mordecai enacts an annual holiday with feasting, giving gifts to poor, and food to friends. Appropriately, the holiday is called Purim, literally, lots that are cast, commemorating how Haman's worldview that everything is determined by chance was overturned by the Jewish ideal that God is present. Chekhov once said that if a rifle lies above the mantle in Act 1 of a play, it had better go off by Act 3. The mark of a good playwright is that no plot element is superfluous. Everything ultimately has a role, and the same goes for the great playwright in the sky. Everything we humans do has its role in the play we call life, but not necessarily in the way we imagine. The book of Esther does not mention the name of God, and that's the whole point. The message of Purim is that God is here even when he doesn't seem to be. God's presence in history is felt not just when the sea splits or when divine fire descends upon a mountain in full view of the entire nation. God is present in the everyday workings of life and history as well. We all have choices to make. That is how we cast our lots in life. But what happens after we make the choice is no longer up to us. Purim demonstrates that God is in complete control, even when he remains behind the scenes. Without the fanfare of miracles, in the space between human choice and the ultimate result, the master of the universe will yet have his say.
And as the Jews say, they tried to kill us, we lived, let's eat. And that's what Purim is all about. But I tell you what, significantly, what he said is very prophetic. Do you realize your big moment has come? You were created for this time in history to fulfill a mission. And it's so exciting when you really connect with God and understand. And so what the Jews would do after they ate, they partied. So I'm got another 4-minute video for you.
Stand for a tale so grand. Shushan is the place where it all began. The hidden miracle. One man, second in command. Slay all the Jews, but his wicked plan. A scheme so miserable. He chose a day for the disaster. It's ironic what came after. He didn't know a girl named Esther would turn it upside down. So raise your glass if you can see the enemy means right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell the story. Then our for who? Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Esther became the queen, cause God was pulling strings from behind the scenes. She wore the royal crown. 3 days the Jews just prayed. Queen Esther risked her life, went to save the day. She took Haman down. The streets were filled with celebration. Everyone ate Hammedatha. Jubilation for the nation. Came to yell. So raise your glass if you can see the enemy means right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell the story. Then our for who? Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. So get your costumes on, make noise and drown out Haman. Don't drink like a fool, and remember what the day's about.
Wait, cut. Was that the door? Can I help you guys?
I heard there was a party here, man!
I think you have the wrong house.
Wait! Where's important?
Come on in!
So raise your glass if you see God in hidden places. He's right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell our story in a humble. So raise your glass if you can see the enemy means right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell the story. Then our for who? Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Purim.
All right, for those of you that are wondering what's the deal with all the costumes, if you remember, as it had mentioned, God's name is hidden, but his hand is all throughout the book of Esther. It's all throughout the history of life, and things don't always appear as they seem to be. And as a matter of fact, the Hebrew word for a face is panaim, which literally means faces. And it's almost like, you ever hear about someone who's two-faced? Well, that's Panaim. We all sometimes have one face one way, one face another way. But in the book of Esther, the costumes are promoted because it's a way of showing how God is hidden. And plus, it's a lot of fun. Now, one other thing before we get started, I want to make some exciting announcements of things that are coming. First off, many of you know on Monday, March 26th, which just is a few weeks from now, we're going to have this big event right here with Randy Neal with Christians United for Israel. And the topic of the discussion is Israel's enemies, understanding Israel's enemies. And it's very exciting to have him here. And we want, as a matter of fact, we sent out 150 emails and letters to congregations all over, churches all over, inviting them to come to this event. And be sure to invite your friends. As a matter of fact, I'll say this, but know that it's only 90%, not 100%. But I was talking to Randy Neal today, and it looks like around the end of August, we may have a big night to honor Israel right here with John Hagee as the keynote speaker. So we hope we can nail that down, and I think we'll really fill this place and show our support. Now, of course, on Thursday night, April 5th, we have our Passover Seder at the Tacoma Dome. You're able to get tickets right here tonight. We highly recommend you get your tickets. But I just added something to the calendar I want to tell you all about, which is very exciting to me. I don't know if you remember the bus ads that they tried to put on the buses this last year, the anti-Israel bus ads. Well, there's an organization run by Rob Jacobs. It's called Stand With Us Northwest. Actually, Stand With Us is out of Israel, but they have little regions all over. And the Stand With Us Northwest director, Rob Jacobs, he's the one that really spearheaded this anti-bus campaign, and a lot of Christians joined him in doing that. Well, I found out there's this young man from Israel. He's a shaliach. And what does that mean? The sent one. That's where you get the word apostle from. But he's basically an ambassador from the state of Israel and traveling around speaking the United States. And anyway, he was going to be in this area, and I'm going to give you real quick his bio. He says, my name is Ron Bar Yoshaphat. He says, my main activity in Seattle is to discuss the state of Israel, what life there is like, and to discuss and answer questions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My goal is to educate while providing a space for genuine dialogue. I'm available to speak at no charge to groups of any size. Okay? Now, in case you remember this on campuses, they're really bashing Israel this week all over the United States. Well, he has been to different campuses speaking. And one in California, he was shouted down, and they were just real rude and all of this kind of stuff. And so I really want to show him that there are people here who aren't rude, and we support Israel. But here's his background. I'm just going to skip over some things. He says, I'm 28 years old. In 1999 and the year 2000, I was the Israeli national champion for mixed martial arts. I received my black belt right after I finished high school. His army service. I began my army service as soon as I finished high school at age 17. I served in an elite special forces unit. I was a hand-to-hand combat expert. My job was to capture terrorists. I'm giving you this background of the guy that's going to be coming and speaking. My first Army Reserve service took place during the Second Lebanon War. I was sent deep into Lebanese territory. As far as my student life, I have a law degree from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I was also very active in initiating, planning, and organizing events all across Israel. The projects ranged up to 1,000 different participants. The activities including helping people with disabilities, doing environmental cleanup work, renovating low-income homes. I'm currently studying for an MBA from Tel Aviv University. I'm also an active member of the World Jewish Diplomatic Corps. I taught prep classes for the Israeli University entrance exam. In addition to teaching, I managed the staff of 15 instructors who made up the Jerusalem district. My main focus was to help minorities such as Ethiopian Jews, people with learning disabilities, and the ultra-Orthodox to pass the exam so they could enroll in a university and obtain higher education. I also worked as a mediator, teaching negotiation and alternative dispute resolution to high school students in Israel. My law residency was in the legal department of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. I was counsel to a number of committees, including the Education, Culture, and Sports Committee. That's where Lemor Livnat's from. The House Committee and the Child Care Committee. I give lectures about Israel's political and security issues and teach leadership courses. This is the 28-year-old man who will be coming and speaking to us about Israel and what's going on. And he's going to do that the week after Randy Neal, the Monday night before our Passover Seder. So that's coming up in just a few weeks. But he wants, from, I don't know how many of you know Itamar Marcus from Palestinian Media Watch. Okay, well, the presentation that he gives, he kind of shows how a lot of the photographs are doctored that we see in the media. How many of you believe our media is biased? Okay. Well, his presentation is quite incredible about what's going on in Israel, Israeli life. And so anyway, I just wanted to mention that that's coming up very soon. And we'll be making a little flyer about that as well. Ron, R-A-N, and then Bar, or son, B-A-R, hyphen Y-O-S-H-A-F-A-T. Sounds like God is judge. Shaphat. Shaphat is judge. But anyway, I could be wrong. Are you ready? Everyone got their groggers? Okay, we have specific readers. The specific readers that we had asked if you would come up. That includes you, Art. Don't be shy. All right, what we're going to do, we're going to read the book of Esther. Coming up, King. I thought there was a couple more readers that we had. All right. Everyone, here's your, you can follow along. You'll have your own little copy here so you'll know where you come in. Here you go. You can follow along. And everyone's going to read a paragraph. And you guys here know what to do? For those that are new, in the book of Exodus, God says we're to blot out the remembrance of Amalek. And Haman was an Amalekite. And so every time you hear the word Haman, what do? And every time you hear the word Esther and Mordecai, all right, you guys got this down. Now, just so you know, in the first paragraph, there's no boo or yays. But in the second paragraph, there are 3 times that you're going to hear another word. It's either Memucan or Memhuman, and you can do those. Those are another names for Haman. All right. Are we ready? I will start off with the first one. And it happened in the days of Ahasuerus. This is the Ahasuerus who reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast to all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media. The nobles and princes of the provinces were before him, and he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, 180 days. And when these days had expired, the king made a feast to all the people who were present in Shushan, the palace, both to the great and small, for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. White, green, and blue hangings were fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver on a pavement of red and white and pearl and black marble. And they gave them drinks in vessels of gold, the vessels being different from one another, and royal wine in abundance according to the hand of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, no one compelling. For so the king had commanded every chief of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure.
Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the woman in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs, Mehuman, Bistha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Agagite, Zathar, and Carcass, who served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown, in order to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was beautiful to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command by his eunuchs. And the king was very angry, and his anger burned with him. And the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's manner towards all who knew law and judgment. And the next to him were Karshena, Shathar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, Memucan. 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face, who sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do with Queen Vashti according to law? Because she has not done the command of the king Ahasuerus by the eunuchs. And Memucan, who answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen has not only done wrong to the king, but also to all the princes and to all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the matter of the queen shall go out to all women, so that their husbands shall be despised in their eyes. And it shall be reported that King Ahasuerus commanded to bring Vashti the queen in before him, but she did not come. And this day the princesses of Persia and Media shall say the same to all the king's princes who have heard of the deed of the queen, and there will be contempt and strife.
If it please the king, let there be a royal command from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be changed, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal state to another who is better than she is. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all the empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give their husbands honor, both great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters unto all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing of it, and to every people in their language, so that every man should bear rule in his own house, and published according to the language of every people.
After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus had calmed down, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. And the king's servants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king choose officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, so that they may gather together all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the palace, to the house of the women, to the hand of Agagite, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women. And let their ointments be given, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shammai, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the young woman was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter.
And it happened when the king's command and his order was heard, and when the many young women had been gathered to Shushan the palace, into the hand of Haggai, Esther was also brought to the king's house, into the hand of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the young woman pleased him, and she received kindness from him. And he quickly gave to her purifiers and her portion, and 7 young women who were fit to be given her out of the king's house. And he moved her and the servant women to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day in front of the court of the woman's house in order to know how Esther did and what was to become of her. And when the turn of each young woman had come to go into the king Ahasuerus, after she had been purified 12 months according to the law of the women, for so the days of their anointing were done, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with the perfumes of the women. And in this way the young woman came to the king. Whatever she desired was given to her to go out with her out of the house of the women to the king's house. She went in the evening, and on the next day she returned to the second house of the women, into the hand of Shazgaz, the king's officer, who kept the concubines.
Thank you. She did not come into the king anymore unless the king delighted in her, and she was called by name. And when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abigail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, had come to go into the king, she asked nothing but what was chosen by Haggai, the king's officer, the keeper of the women. And Esther had favor in the sight of all who looked on her. And Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she rose in grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. And he set the royal crown on her head, made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king made a great feast to all his princes and his servants, Esther's feast. And he ordered a release for the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet revealed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as she did when she was brought up with him.
Take a deep breath. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were angry, tried to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told Esther, the queen, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. And when the matter was searched into, it was found out, and the 2 of them were hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the matters of the days before the king. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants in the king's gate bowed and worshipped Haman, for the king had so commanded him. But Mordecai did not bow nor worship.
And the king's servants in the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And it happened, when they spoke daily to him, and when he did not listen to them, they told Haman to see if Mordecai, if his matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow nor worship him, then Haman was full of wrath, and he scorned to lay hands only on Mordecai. For they had revealed to him the people of Mordecai. And Haman sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. The people of Mordecai, in the first month, that is, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of the king Ahasuerus, they cast the lot, before Haman, from day to day and month to month, to the 12th month, the month of Adar. And Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from all people. Neither do they keep the king's laws, and it is not for the king's gain to allow them to live. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those who have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy.
And the king said to Haman, the silver is given you, the people also, to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded to the king's lieutenants and to the governors who were over every province and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing of it, and to every people according to their language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by postal riders into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take what they owned for a prize. The copy of the writing for a command to be given in every province was published to all people to be ready for that day. The post went out, being hurried by the king's command, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed, and Mordecai understood all that was done, and Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the middle of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And he even came before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth.
And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther's servant women and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was exceedingly grieved. And she sent clothing to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him. But he did not receive it. And Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend on her, and gave him a command to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. And Hathach went forth from Mordecai to the street of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened to him, and of all the sum of the silver which Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews in order to destroy them. And he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree which was given at Shushan in order to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it to her, and to command her that she should go in to the king to make supplication to him and to seek help for her people.
And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him command to Mordecai. And the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king into the inner court, who is not called, there's only one law of his execution, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter so that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai commanded them to answer Esther, do not think within yourself that you will escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if you are completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for a time such as this?
Yay! And Esther said to return to Mordecai this answer. Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, and do not eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. My maidservants and I will also fast in the same way. And so I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai passed over and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. And it happened on the third day, Esther put on royal clothing and stood in the inner court of the king's house across from the king's house. And the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house across from the gate of the house. And it happened when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she received favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand. And Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, what do you desire, Queen Esther? And what is your wish? It shall be given to you even to half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, if it be a good thing to the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet, which I have prepared for him. And the king said, cause Haman to hurry, so that he may do as Esther has said. And the king and Haman came to the banquet, which Esther had prepared.
And the king said to Esther, at the banquet of wine, what is your petition, that it shall be granted to you? And what is your request? It shall be performed even to half the kingdom. And Esther answered and said, as to my petition and my request, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. And Haman went forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he did not stand up nor move for him, he was full of fury against Mordecai. But Haman held himself in. And when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and his many sons, and all to which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. And Haman, he said, yes, Esther, the queen, let no man but me come in with the king to the banquet that she had prepared. And also tomorrow I am invited to her banquet with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, as long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate.
And Zeresh his wife and all his friends said to him, make a wooden gallows 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak to the king that Mordecai may be hanged on it. Boo. Then go in merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the wooden gallows to be made. On that night the king could not go to sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the matter of the days. And they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the keepers of the door, who tried to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who served him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?"
And Haman had come into the outer court of the king's house to speak to the king, to hang Mordecai. No, that's not good. On the wooden gallows which he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said to him, "Behold, Haman stands in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in. And the king said to him, "What shall be done to the man in whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman thought in his heart, "To whom would the king delight to do honor more than myself?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal clothing be brought, which the king wears, and the horse that the king rides on, and the royal crown which is set on his head. And let this clothing and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, so that they may dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaim before him, 'This is what shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'"
And so the king said to Haman, "Make haste, take the clothing and the horse as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not fail to do any of all the things you have spoken." And so Haman took the clothing and the horse and dressed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the streets of the city and proclaimed before him, "This is what shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, said to him, "If Mordecai is of the seed of the Jews before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him."
And while they were talking with him, the king's eunuchs came, and they hurried to bring Haman to the banquet, which Esther had prepared. And the king and Haman came to the banquet of Esther the queen. And the king said again to Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, "What is your petition, Queen Esther, that it may be granted you? And what is your request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom." And Esther, the queen, answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to perish. But if we had been sold for men slaves and women slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not make up for the king's damage."
And King Ahasuerus answered and said to Esther, the queen, "Who is he, and where is the one who dares presume in his heart to do so?" And Esther said, "The man who is our adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine, in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to beg for his life from Esther, the queen, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of the banquet of wine. And Haman had fallen on the bed on which Esther, where she was. And the king said, "Will he also force the queen before me in the house?"
As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbana, one of the eunuchs, said before the king, "Also look, the wooden gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stands in the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him on it." And they hanged Haman on the wooden gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. And the king's wrath lay down. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Esther, the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and begged him with tears to put away the evil of Haman, the Agagite, and his plot which he had plotted against the Jews.
Then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. Yay! And Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing is right before the king, and if I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to bring back the documents." A sly plan, Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. "For how can I bear to see the evil that shall come on my people? Or how can I endure to see the slaughter of my kindred?" And King Ahasuerus said to Esther, the queen, and to Mordecai, the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and have hanged him on the wooden gallows." Yay! "Because he laid his hand on the Jews. And you write for the Jews as it pleases you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, no man may turn back."
And then the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, the month Sivan, on the 23rd of it. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and to the lieutenants and governors and rulers of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to the writing of it, and to every people in their writing, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring. And he sent letters by riders on horseback, riders on royal steeds, stallions, even sons of mares. And them the king granted the Jews in every city to gather themselves and to stand for their life, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province who desired to attack them, little ones and women, and to take what they owned for a prize, on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. The copy of the writing for a command to be given in every province was announced to all the people, even that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The runners, the riders on stallions, royal steeds, went out, being hurried and pressed on by the king's command. And the order was given at Shushan the palace.
And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal clothing of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city where the king's command and his order came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews. for the fear of the Jews fell on them. And in the 12th month, the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and his order came to be done, and the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned around so that the Jews had rule over the ones who hated them. The Jews gathered themselves in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus in order to lay hand on anyone who sought their harm. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell on all people. And all the rulers of the provinces and all the lieutenants and the governors and officers of the king helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell on them.
For Mordecai was great in the house of the king, and his fame went throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai was going on and growing greater. And the Jews struck all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would to those who hated them. And in Shushan, the palace, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And Parshadontha, and Dalphon, and Aspatha, and Paratha, and Adalia, and Aridatha, and and Ardea, and Vajrava. They killed the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. On that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan, the palace, was brought before the king.
And the king said to Esther, the queen, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? And what is your petition, that it may be granted you? Or what further request do you have? And it shall be done. Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews in Shushan to do tomorrow, also according to this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the wooden gallows. Yay! And the king commanded it to be done. And the order was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews in Shushan gathered themselves on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. But the rest of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered themselves, and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their foes. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil.
And on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews at Shushan gathered on the 13th day of it, and on the 14th of it, and on the 15th of the same, they rested and made it a day of fasting and feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who lived in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, a day of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, near and far, to establish among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly as the days in which the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned to them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions to one another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do it as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, the lot, to finish them and to destroy them.
But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked plot, which he had plotted against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hung on the wooden gallows. Therefore they call these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, in which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come to them, the Jews ordained and took on them and on their seed, and all such as joined themselves to them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, according to their time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. And these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed.
And Esther the queen, the daughter of Abigail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, in order to confirm these days of Purim in their set times, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had ordered them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and of their cry. And the order of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim. And it was written in the book. And King Ahasuerus laid a tax on the land and on the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, with which the king had made him great, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and pleasing to all the multitude of his brothers, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.
Yay! Woohoo! Woohoo! All right, give them a big hand. They did a great job. I thought it was kind of interesting. Many of you know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was at the AIPAC meeting in Washington, D.C., and he met with President Obama today. What I thought was cool, well, listen, President Obama, it said in the news, gave Netanyahu a copy of the book of Esther. And then Netanyahu told him what it was about. But seriously, he gave him, and I thought it was fantastic that President Obama gave him a book of Esther. I think that's very appropriate. But I also think it's very exciting. It goes on to say how Netanyahu, related to President Obama, how Iran was modern Persia and all this, and kind of explained his story. And I think that's so exciting to hear this next week. You know, on Thursday is Purim, actually, for 2 days. And we live in exciting times. We really do, prophetically. And so we need to be watching and praying. We need to be praying for our president. We need to be praying for our government, that they make the appropriate steps to protect the nation of Israel, because that is our protection. Yay! Let's play the Maccabite song as we close. And remember, we have Passover Seder tickets you want to get. Also, the kids are going to be meeting in the glass pavilion. We have great food. Let's stand and close in prayer. Father, we just thank you so much for this time. Destiny is truly in your hands. And we just want to commit ourselves to you. Right now, we want to lift up the nation of Israel. Father, we just pray for your protection over them. Your guiding hand, that they would know they need to trust in you, not in America, that you're the one who has their back. And we thank you for that. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Stand for a tale so grand. Shushan is the place where it all began. The hidden miracle. One man, second in command. Slay all the Jews, but his wicked plan. A scheme so miserable. He chose a day for the disaster. It's ironic what came after. He didn't know a girl named Esther would turn it upside down. So raise your glass if you can see the enemy needs right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell the story. Then our for who? Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just was pulling strings from behind the scenes. She wore the royal crown. 3 days the Jews just prayed. Queen Esther risked her life, went to save the day. She took Haman down. The streets were filled with celebration. Everyone ate Hammedatha. Jubilation for the nation.
So raise your glass if you can see the hidden meanings right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell the story, fan out for who. Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass.
So get your costumes on, make noise and drown out Haman. Don't drink like a fool, and remember what the day's about.
Wait, cut. Was that the door? Can I help you guys?
I heard there was a party here, man.
I think you have the wrong house.
Wait! Afraid of important.
Come on in!
So raise your glass if you see God in hidden places. He's right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell our story in a humble group. So raise your glass if you can see the hidden meanings right in front of you. We will never be anything but proud to tell the story in a humble group. Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Won't you come on and raise your glass? Just come on and raise your glass. Purim.
Thank you for studying with us today. If you have any questions regarding the material discussed, please contact me at my email address. It's pastormark@elshaddaiministries.us. Be blessed and shalom.